Mon Dieu! C'est la Bretonnie! This is the most beautiful, the most elegant, the most righteous, and of course, the most tragic army in Warhammer Fantasy. Bretonnia is a land of great kings, beautiful damsels, brave knights, high gleaming towers, and strange mist-wreathed marshes. If you were to die for Bretonnia, would it be for the love, for the honour, or for the glory? Or perhaps for all three? In this video, I'm just going to talk about how you can play with this admittedly rather thin army book, 6th edition army book of course, in the big bad world of 8th edition fantasy, and get the most out of playing Bretonnia and to win with Bretonnia as well. Before I do that, I'm just going to hand over to my Demon Prince, who has a little comment that he'd like to make, like he has on some of my other videos. And, well, what do you have to say about Bretonnia, old chap? Not somewhere I would imagine you've been. Oh, you have been in there? And on holiday? Well, what were you going on holiday for? It doesn't seem like the kind of place that there would be much for a debauched Slaneshi Demon Prince. Oh, 'cause it's the land of love. Well, yes, I suppose it is. And any other reason? Because it's the land of wine. Well, yes, absolutely. And what, pray, did you drink while you were there? What fine vintages did you consume? Blue Nun? Blue Nun in 10-litre containers with packets of 200 cigarettes on the side stuffed into the back of a van? This isn't some kind of booze cruise, mate. This isn't like some Dover to Calais. This is Bretonnia. This is the land of chivalry, the land of virtue, the land of beauty. Be off with you. Go and drink your Blue Nun down there in the cellar, and let's get on with the real meat of this analysis. So, Bretonnia are, of course, as I say, a 6th edition army in the big bad world of 8th edition. But there is so much to love about Bretonnia. Maybe it's the lore, maybe it's the romance, the beauty of the models, the painting opportunities that they create. From the 80s era Bretonnians, the sort of feudal France era, to the 90s Bretonnians, the beautiful Perry era, which is what the majority of my army is, and of course the 6th edition stuff as well. As well as this beauty and the opportunities for freehanding, heraldry, all sorts of beautiful ways in which you can paint your knights, there are also of course the fact that gamers will respect you for playing Bretonnia. You're going to be someone, if you're playing Bretonnia, who probably really loves the game. You're not going to be a power gamer with this book, because it isn't very powerful. It doesn't have very many troop choices, and it's about 20 years old, which is one of the many reasons why I'm going to call it tragic, and I'll come to that in a moment. Also, as well as the painting, and as well as being respected for someone who is a real proper wargamer and not a power gamer, you'll be playing Bretonnia for the tactical challenge. Bretonnia is a very hard army to win with because the power level is very low compared to most other 8th edition armies, because this is a 6th edition army, and in 6th edition most things were nowhere near as strong as they were in 8th edition. So it was fine if you were competing against other 6th ed stuff. When it comes to 8th ed stuff, doesn't look so clever. But really, Bretonnia is ideal, I think, if you are an experienced player, if you want a tactical challenge, if you want to make use of an army with a modest power level and try to find ways of winning. And if you do win with Bretonnia on a regular basis, it's likely because you're quite good rather than because you've been cheesy. Now, playing with Bretonnia, while it can be really very difficult, can be made a lot easier and a lot more forgiving with one modification to the core rules, which was conceived and thought of by Triple Crown Wargaming, which is simply to give all Bretonnian knights the devastating charge rule. This gives them +1 attack when they charge, and it means that all of the knights who are using the lance formation can also benefit from those extra attacks in supporting ranks. This means that you throw a lot more dice when you charge, and sometimes, although not always, you can break opposing infantry formations steadfast with the devastating charge. Now, without devastating charge, I think Bretonnia are the weakest army in 8th edition fantasy. I think they're weaker than Beastmen, I think they're weaker than Tomb Kings. With devastating charge, I think they are significantly better than Beastmen and Tomb Kings, and arguably Chaos Dwarves as well, and maybe even getting up to the power level of some of the weaker races that did have 8th ed books, Tomb Kings accepted, of course. So, agree with your opponent if you're going to use devastating charge or not. If I'm playing a new player, for example, and I'm playing with Bretonia, because I'm an experienced player and I've got a Warriors of Chaos army that is very powerful, I'll play with Bretonia to give myself a tactical challenge, and I won't use Devastating Charge. And that represents something really interesting. But that's the reason really to play with Bretonia. It's not because they're really very strong, it's because they're an interesting tactical challenge, and because they are so beautiful, they are so noble, and because you will feel so good when you're playing with them, even when you die horribly. And of course, you can wheel out all of the excuses and you can say, oh well, this is only a 6th edition army, I'm only in it for the painting, I'm only in it for the spirit of the game. And of course, what you should really be doing is trying to get your opponent to let his guard down, so then you can kill him with your army that's actually a bit better, quite a lot better actually, than it looks. Yes, so that's the last thing, being tactically astute. So I should say why Bretonia are generally bad in 8th edition, first and foremost. Now, they were great in 6th edition and great in 7th edition, because of course, in those days, you struck first when you charged, stuff didn't fight back once it was dead, and there was no steadfast. All of those things made heavy cavalry very powerful in those editions. All of those things are now gone, and consequently, your knights, when they charge into an opposition infantry horde, are going to find several things that count against them. First of all, when they charge in there, even though they're guys with a great long lance, they're probably not going to be striking first a lot of the time, because they've got initiative 3, most of them. Some poncy elf is going to be standing there, like a phoenix guard, with the halberd puffing away on his Marlboros, and your knight is going to charge into him, and then the phoenix guards will wake up with initiative of 6, strike before him, with rerolls to hit of course, because it always strikes first, and kill most of your knights before they even get to swing. Which is one of the very many reasons why this army is rather tragic. There are other reasons why it's tragic as well, such as the fact that, according to rumour anyway, a bunch of 8th edition models were about to be brought out when Bretonia were going to have their new army book, and of course, that never happened. And so they're going rotten somewhere in some warehouse in Nottingham. Dear me, what a shame. Apart from the guys striking first, well, even if you do kill guys that are of lower initiative than you, they're going to step up and they're going to fight your knights back, whereas previously they didn't. And worst, and by far the worst, is going to be that when, or if, but probably when, you win combat with your knights on the charge, your enemy is going to be steadfast because they're going to have more ranks than you, and so you're not going to break them. And then your knights are just going to be left with a few horses and a few men with strength 3 in subsequent combat rounds, and everyone knows how that's going to go. So, these things all make heavy cavalry worse. Another thing that makes them worse is the absence of zoning. So the way zoning used to work, your knights used to be able to charge 16 inches flat when charge rates were doubled up in the old days. You could easily get it so that most enemy infantry with movement 4, movement 5, you could have it so that your knights could charge him in the next turn and he can't charge you. Now, with random charges, sure your knights are swift stride, but sometimes you can fail easy charges and then get charged back by the infantry. Sometimes infantry can get long bomb charges on you as well, so you can't necessarily always assume the charge in the way that you used to. So, all of those things really, really hurt Bretonia. And of all that wasn't enough, of course, the fact is that in 8th edition, hordes of infantry are part of the meta of the game. So it's no longer the case that you'll be fighting, say, 20 or 25 guys, as you used to be in the past. Now you might be fighting 40 or 50 of them, which makes them even more difficult to break with their steadfasts. Even other little things kind of screwed over Bretonia, like the fact that we used to be allowed to have more characters than other armies. Now that's not the case. You've just got your 25% hero and 25% lord allowances, just like everyone else. Miscast table. Oh, that's a horrible one. Your Damsel or Prophetess riding in the middle of her knights. Now if she gets a 7 on the miscast table, she's going to make all of the knights around her take strength 10 hits. That, again, didn't used to happen in the old days, and that's horrible for Bretonia, because, every one game in 3, you'll end up basically with a dead knight unit because you get a miscast on your Prophetess or your Damsel. So all those changes to the 8th edition core rules all screwed over Bretonia royally, I'm afraid to say. Bretonians are also notoriously unforgiving. You've got to really pick your charges, and even if you get them right, that is to say, even if you kill or you break what you charge, your knights, with their long lance train-like formations, will probably be left in a vulnerable position vulnerable to a counter by, say, another unit that's on the side. And then you're probably going to be running if you get an infantry block in your side. So you're very vulnerable to counter charges. You are also massively vulnerable to chaff. By chaff, I mean little units of fast cavalry usually, but sometimes it can be flying things that can go and park themselves in front of your units and stop them charging. The reason you're more vulnerable to this than other armies is because you're more dependent on charging yourself, for one, and secondly, because your lances, which are the quite small special formations that your knights go in, generally speaking will rank up relatively close to each other, so they can benefit from the general's leadership, the BSB, and also some bubbled up spells like Harmonic Convergence. This means that one unit of light cavalry can trot in front and block 3 or maybe 2 or 3 of your lances, and with an infantry block coming up behind them, and so therefore you are faced with the option of either charging the chaff off or and then being charged by the infantry, or backing up or finding some other clever way of dealing with it. All of that hurts Bretonia as well. They're probably the most vulnerable army to being chaffed out of any in Warhammer 8th edition. Also, the 6th edition army, for the most part, has overcosted units. They're all just a few more points than you think they would be in 8th edition. When you do your troop-to-troop comparisons with armies of other races, you'll find your stuff's just expensive. And if all that wasn't enough, ladies and gentlemen, in order to get your Blessing of the Lady, which is another army ride rule that Bretonians have got, which means that your knights will get a 5+ ward save from strength 5 or more attacks coming into them, or a 6+ ward save otherwise, which is always worth having, you have to go second. So your opponent will deploy super aggressively with the absolute certainty that he knows he's going to go first. And that can also be a problem for you as well, because the battle line might look a little bit different after turn 1 and your opponent's pushed his stuff up, especially if he's not scared of being charged with your knights. Then there's not much you can really do. Now, with all that bad news, there is some good news as well about Bretonia. So, some of the advantages are that Bretonians have loads of magic items, because in 6th edition there were very few core rulebook magic items. They were pretty much all in the army book. And so you've got about 55 or 60 magic items in this book, and some of them are quite good. You've also got knightly virtues as well, which are a bit like vampire bloodline powers or chaos rewards, other things you can give to your knights. Some of those are quite good too, and we'll talk about those later. There are also precisely 5 things in this book that are very good. And they are the Duke with Heroic Killing Blow, the Duke with the Virtue of Knightly Temper, the Green Knight, the Trebuchet, and the Virtue of the Impetuous Knight. As many of those things as possible should find their way into your competitive Bretonian army list if you want to win. You also have the Lance Formation and the Blessing, as I mentioned. Lance Formation, great formation, gives you lots of extra attacks, makes it easier to build up ranks, even though you're only using it on Bretonian knights who aren't very good. And you've got the Blessing, which I explained, which is nice. The other real advantage, I think, of Bretonians is that they are unknown and underestimated. Very few people will have ever played with Bretonia themselves, and very few will have even necessarily faced Bretonia themselves, because Bretonia, with their super expensive models, their rare army books, are a very unusual army to see in Warhammer, on Warhammer tables nowadays. And so that means if you are a Bretonian player, you can expect your opponent to probably play quite badly against you if they haven't seen Bretonia before, and especially if they don't know the relatively small number of tricks that the Bretonians have got. So you can be underestimated. And this, of course, counts double if you're playing with closed lists. Now, a closed list is simply where you don't tell your opponent, and he doesn't tell you, what magic items and things are on his characters. And because you've got a lot of magic items, and because some of your stuff does some really quite cool things, you can get an advantage if the list is closed, because your opponent doesn't necessarily know what's there. And even if he does know what's there, if you're playing an open list or he heavily suspects it in a closed list, he may play differently because of a couple of things in this army that just are very powerful and slightly change the core dynamics of the game in a slightly old-fashioned, FAQ'd, sick-ed, whimsical sort of 20-year-old kind of way. So, that really helps. Now, I think you have to adopt a very distinct philosophy if you're going to play with Bretonnia. The first philosophy would simply be play them because you love the models. They've got beautiful models. They've always had beautiful models. If you like feudal era France, if you're a Francophile, if you like Arthurian Camelot, Bretonnia is a perfect army for you. If you like the idea of being an unambiguously good, noble kind of heroic knight and all of the kind of sort of piety that comes with that, if that's what you enjoy embodying as a fantasy persona, then you'll love it. I am at heart much more of an evil chaos player than I am a Bretonian, I must admit. I'm far too chaotic and far too unscrupulous to really be a proper knight, but nonetheless I still enjoy playing with Bretonnia. The other part of the philosophy is to accept, as I say, that this is a tactical challenge. It's a hard army to use, it's unforgiving. And perhaps moreover than that, often when players lose at Warhammer, they think, oh, I'll think about changing my army. I'll go and paint up a new kind of unit. I'll try what that other guy's, playing over there and see if that gets me any better. If you're a Warriors of Chaos army, you might think, oh, I'll bring a Chimera next time, or I'll bring some Skull Crushers next time. You've got lots of different sort of choices, how you can vary your army to see what works for you. Bretonnia, there aren't really very many choices because there are only about 6 troop types or something, and they all do pretty similar things. So really, what you've got to do is you've just simply got to use what you've got better, which is why this is a purist's army, an army for the Spartan. Now, bear in mind, there's no real cheese in this book. And by cheese, of course, I mean nasty combinations that are so overpowered that they slightly ruin the game. There are some things that are surprising in this. There's no question about that. It's not necessarily that they're that strong, it's that they are very surprising. And part of the reason why they're surprising is because people don't know about them. But there isn't really any cheese. And so, by all means, go full out if you're going to try and play competitively. Double fleas, railroading, all sorts of inventive ways of using chaff. Do unconventional things like put things in conga lines, deploy things in darts, do combat reforms, do the works. That's what you're going to need to do if you want to win with this. But you have to simply accept, a lot of the time, even if you play well, you just won't win. Because sometimes your opponent's army will just be too good. And if you are playing competitively, there are sometimes some games where you have to just simply accept the army that is facing me across the table is too good for me. It's too strong for my 6th Ed army book, even if I've got devastating charge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not fight, say, his main infantry block, and I'm going to pick off some of the things that I can kill and go for a skinny victory. Now, in friendly games, of course, you're probably not going to be doing that, and it's quite difficult in a friendly game to deliberately run away when you've got a few knights left to preserve the points or not go for the big charges. And so, hence, I think in friendly games, Bretonnia actually loses even more often than it does competitively. But I make a distinction between friendly and kind of competitive games because, who says that playing competitively is the only way you want to play? It's probably interesting from a theory hammer perspective to talk about playing competitively because then you can just dial it down if you want to play in a relaxed way. But the point is that if you're playing Bretonnia, no one will think you're a power gamer, and you should just use the tools that you have, and there aren't many of those, to make the game as competitive as you can. Now, I just wanted to go through basically the troop types in this book, as I did in my previous Warriors of Chaos book, and talk about some of the main builds that I think are the best ones. There are not a lot of troop types in this book, I should say, because it's such a thin army book. Then I'm going to actually talk about some tactics as well, because, as I say, it's not just about building your army, which is really what I talked about with Warriors of Chaos and not much else. It's using what you have the best that you can. So let's have a little look into this book. And absolutely, when you look at it, you should look at, read all the history, look at all the pictures. And yeah, there are a lot of those, a lot of rules. No, not a lot of rules, sorry. A lot of pictures, a lot of, history of Gilles Le Breton and how, he founded Bretonnia. There's a nice map of Bretonnia here as well, you might want to look at. I mean, if you were reading the Dark Elf book by now, you'd have probably already, by about page 5, you'd have got like 10 layers of game-breaking cheese by now. But for Bretonia, you've got a map. That's nice, isn't it? And you can read all about Bretonian geography and look at all the pictures. And then once you've done that, you might have been expecting some rules by now, but no! You've got 4 pages of heraldry. So look, even if your knights are dead, they can still have beautiful heraldry. They can still look, up from the battlefield, their slain horses, their slain shields, and display their beautiful heraldry to the world, where your opponent's evil marauding Death Star of Doom tramples on its road to wreaking havoc and vengeance in the world. What a shame. Anyway, I'm keeping going through this book because mainly it just seems to be pictures where there should be some rules. Well, there's a picture here of the lance formation, so you should probably have a little look at that so I can explain what it does. So you see those chaps there? They're in the lance formation, and you'll see that there's a frontage of only 3. That's one of the reasons why the lance formation's quite good, because that reduces your frontage, because each of those 3 guys counts as a rank, which isn't just good for breaking your opponent's steadfast, although it is good for that too, also because it gives you a rank bonus as well, which is nice. And see, all of the knights on the front or the sides of that lance formation can all fight. And with more than one attack if you're playing Devastating Charge or the Grail Knights generically. So that unit there at the top, you've got, as you can see, 3 on either side and 1 at the front. That's 7 guys who are fighting there at their full number of attacks. And 1 guy who's supporting too. So if that's a normal Knight of the Realm unit and you've got a champion and you charge in there, you are going to be swinging 9 attacks. And if you're playing with Devastating Charge, it's going to be 16 attacks. And the horses. Don't forget about the horses. Don't forget about Le Cheval. Yeah, so pretty advantageous, I think, the lance formation. Right, anyway. Oh, my word. Still more pages of transfers and colours. Oh, the land of chivalry. Oh, la, 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 la. Eventually, we get to the first page where there's something new for me to add, which are some new army-wide rules. Now, I've mentioned the lance formation, I've mentioned the Blessing of the Lady, which of course you have to pray for. I should say about the Blessing of the Lady, you generally always want the Blessing of the Lady. You always want to pray to get that 5-up ward save against attacks of strength 5 or more, or that 6-up ward against everything else. Now, there are occasions, once in a blue moon, where I might not do that. So, for example, once I was facing a Tomb King army with Kalinda, and the main threat in the army was loads and loads and loads of poisoned archers. Now, the main thing that was going to protect me there was my knight's generic 2-up armor save, not really my Blessing of the Lady on 6-up. Because I deployed before him and got the +1, I decided, yeah, let's risk it. I won the first turn roll, and then my knights were all over him before he could do anything. So sometimes you might want to risk it, but generally speaking, you probably don't. The more strength 5 he's got in the army, the more you want the Blessing of the Lady, because that's going to be one of the few things that's going to be protecting you. A few other nice little rules here where you can see this picture here of a knight and some peasants and things together. Of course, unlike in 5th edition, where this was all presented in a rather kind of idyllic fairy tale way, in the darkened world of 6th edition, it's all a bit antagonistic. Because the peasants are ground down serfs with absolutely nothing except a few potatoes, and the lords are high and mighty and chivalrous, dining in the beautiful banqueting halls of the great castles, without a care in the world for their peasants, apart from protecting them, of course, when the orcs invade. Anyway, there are 3 vows of Bretonia, generic knightly vows. One is called the Knight's Vow, which is the most basic one. This means that if there's a peasant that dies or flees through you, it doesn't cause panic tests on your knights. And of course it shouldn't. Why should a fleeing peasant panic a knight? The other one is the Questing Vow, which means you can reroll psychology tests. It's quite good, but the problem is, questing knights are absolutely rubbish, for reasons we'll come on to later. And the third is the Grail Vow, makes you immune to psychology. In 6th Ed, psychology, because of fear as much as anything else, and not being able to reroll panic from your BSB, was a big deal, so the Grail Vow was also rather good. Nowadays, it's not as good as it used to be, but it's still helpful. It does mean dudes that have got it can't flee, and unfortunately you're going to be needing to do quite a lot of running away from time to time, even though that's rather inappropriate for Bretonia. The final rule here is called the Peasant's Duty. This means that any knight within 6 of a peasant can give his leadership to the peasant. Peasants have usually got leadership 5. Most of your knights have got leadership 8. So this is rather a good way of keeping that rabble in order. They respect your knights. La Révolution has not yet begun. Anyway, so let's go on to some actual troop types now. And the first things we're going to talk about are characters. Now, I'm probably going to spend more time talking about characters than I am the actual troops, because this is where most of the power in your army is to be found, in the characters. As I say, in 5th Ed, you used to have a 75% character allowance for Britonia. In 6th Ed, you could have more characters. Now you can just have the same as everyone else. Boo. So, your lord choices first. Your first one is the Bretonnian lord. Well, he's a generic human lord on a horse. But there are quite a few options with him. First thing you can do with him is you can put him on a Pegasus. That obviously means he's quite fast and he can get into combat to do his stuff. You could put him on a Hippogriff if you were masochistically minded, but the Hippogriff costs about 200 points and it's rubbish. And it's very vulnerable to cannons, like any monster and rider combination in 8th edition fantasy. So I wouldn't recommend that. So usually, you'll see a lord on a horse. He'll usually be riding with your knights. Usually it's going to be your knights of the realm. And that's generally the case because you don't really want him with your knights errant, because you'll find that he sometimes has to charge because of their impetuous rule when you don't want him. And if you put him with your Grail Knights, he'll have to buy a Grail Vow for 28 points, which is an absolute huge amount of points to spend on something that doesn't really help you very much anyway. And he's probably not going to be a questing knight because questing knights are rubbish. So, what are the ways you can run this guy? What are the main builds? Now, Bretonia is all about combining magic items and virtues to get you some optimal stuff. And there are all kinds of combinations because there are about 50 magic items, and I'll talk about some of the best of them after I've spoken about the characters. And there are virtues as well. Virtues are things that Bretonians can buy, which come out of the same allowance as magic items. Which kind of sucks because vampires get their bloodline powers out of a different allowance, so do Chaos Lords with their Chaos rewards. Whereas you as Bretonia have to just pay for them all out of your magic item allowance. And so that does slightly limit your scope for funky combinations. But there are still some very, very funky ones you can get. Right, listen carefully, mesdames et messieurs. This is the first really good thing that Bretonia have got. This is the Lord with Virtue of Knightly Temper and the Cuirass of Fortune. That's more or less it. So, the Virtue of Knightly Temper means that if he hits and wounds before saves and wards note, he gets another attack for each time he does that. The Cuirass of Fortune allows him to reroll rolls of 1 to hit, wound, armor save, and ward save as well. So, he charges into a unit of infantry with 4 attacks or 5 attacks if you're playing with Devastating Charge, hitting on 3s, usually because he's got weapon score 6, and that's better even than elite infantry, rerolling 1s. You can see that's going to mean most of the attacks hit. And then wounding, probably going to be on 2s rerolling 1s with his lance. Then he might spawn another 4 or 5 extra attacks. It's not unusual for this guy to kill 8 or even 10 infantry on the charge. Whoa! That's going to take off quite a bit of the admittedly massive Death Star that your opponent is probably running. So, that is a very, very powerful character there, and he costs less than 200 points. Usually, you'll see him in a knight unit, and in particular this is powerful if you put him in the unit with Virtue of the Impetuous Knight, which makes an excellent delivery mechanism for your multiple warhead armed Lord Nuke. The second really good thing Bretonia you've got is another kind of Duke, and that's the Duke with Heroic Killing Blow. Now, this is a heavily FAQ'd version of the Virtue of Heroism. What this does is if you roll a 6 on your roll to wound with any of your attacks, your opponent is dead, destroyed, expired, buried beneath the ashes and the ground of Bretonia, never to rise again. Yeah, that's what you want, that is. So, the way of maximising the effectiveness of this guy is obviously to give him the most number of opportunities to show that magical 6. And there are 2 ways you can do this that are the most effective. The first is my favourite. This is to give him the Sword of Swift Slaying from the General Warhammer Army book, Warhammer Rules book. That allows him to get always strikes first, and of course he gets rerolls to hit, but he's got a better initiative or equal to his opponent. He has initiative 6, and so that's quite likely. So a lot of the time you charge in, you've got 5 attacks with Devastating Charge, 3s rerolling to hit, and then the next set of dice, 1, 6, and he's gone. The other thing you can give him is the Other Trickster's Shard. This means that the enemy reroll ward saves when you kill them. Nothing worse than someone who's been heroically killing blowed, passing a ward save and then not being heroically killing blowed. The Other Trickster's Shard means that if he passes it, he's got to pass it again. This means, hopefully, what is dead will stay dead, which is where you want it. Now, the other way of having him would be with the Heartwood Lance, which is reroll wounds, and the Tress of Isolde, which means he's 2+ to hit for 1 round of combat. You can see how that's also going to give him a lot of opportunities to use his heroic killing blow. Now, generally, and especially for the first combination, because it has the Other Trickster's Shard, which also makes things that you have in base-to-base reroll ward saves as well, you're going to want him on a Pegasus. This means he's got excellent maneuverability. He's going to be able to dive into your opponents. Your opponents won't be able to chaff him easily. And even you may be able to just fly him in front of things, even if you can't charge. And your opponent maybe charges him. You've got a reroll to hit, always strikes first sword. You're probably going to kill your opponent before he strikes you. And then, because it's your opponent's turn, your lord can then turn round and face something else and then ram that with a heroic killing blow as well in the next turn, and thus go through a series of hopefully magical 6s as your opponent stares stupefied in belief at how you have absolutely eviscerated him with a crappy 6th edition army book. Yes, that's the kind of thing you can do sometimes with this guy. But of course, sometimes it doesn't work, because rolling 6s is hard, unfortunately. And sometimes you'll go in there, you'll get 4 hits and you just won't get any 6s. And then you'll be in trouble. Because probably what you've tried to heroically killing blow is a feat worthy of heroism. And so that thing will probably then kill you in response. Because your guy's only got a 3-up armor save and a 5-up ward save. Not that much. Now, you can give him a few things to make him a bit more survivable. Give him a Charmed Shield on a Pegasus. Might stop a cannonball. Elsewise, it's going to stop a hit. Give him the Dragonbane Gem, so give him a 2-up against Flaming. Give him a Luck Stone as well if you really wanted to. Little things which might give him a bit of a better chance of getting another chance to get his heroic killing blow. You could also give him the Potion of Speed for 5 points, a rather seldom selected magic item, +3 initiative for 1 phase. This means that if you know you're going into something that's got a bigger initiative than you, that's still 9 or less, Vampire Lord, Demon Prince, Chaos Lord, Elf Lord, all sorts of things, you can quaff that before you go in, and then you'll be getting rerolls to hit from your Always Strikes First sword. That's rather nice, gives you a much better chance of showing that magical 6. Now, because your opponent, if your opponent knows you've got heroic killing blow in the army, or he suspects it, I can guarantee you he's going to play different. He'll be much cagier with any monsters that he has, with any really powerful characters that he has. And that on its own, even if your heroic killing blow guy does nothing at all, is going to hopefully make him play differently. And thus begins one of several ways you can start to control the board with Bretonia, because you've got a few things that can push your opponent around. I'll come to a couple of other of those in a minute. Now, of course, it's the most powerful, as is the Virtue of Knightly Temper in a closed list, when your opponent doesn't know it's there, and better still, doesn't even know it exists. Now, I would, as a point of courtesy, I should say, always tell my opponent before any game, regardless of whether I have these things or not, especially heroic killing blow, I would say, well, you do know that Bretonia have got something called the heroic killing blow, the virtue of heroism, and that means, etc. Once your opponent knows that, he might play differently. It might start to plant one of the seeds of doubt in his mind. You've got to be mass farming some of those seeds of doubt with other things, and your opponent might start thinking, oh, I might lose to Bretonia, what a humiliation. Exactly. That's when you know you've got the upper hand on him. So those are your 2 main dukes. I like, if I can, to have both of them, I must admit. But of course, you're only allowed 25% lords in the core rulebook, which means you're only going to be able to have 1, because you're going to have a level 4 wizard as well, because that's a must-take in 8th edition. So you probably only can have 1 of them. But if you're playing 50% lords, you can have the guy with Virtue of Heroism, the guy with the Virtue of Knightly Temper, a Prophetess, and the Green Knight as well. All 4 of the suckers. And that's good. Now, your next Lord choice is your level 4 wizard. your Prophetess. Now, she's not too badly priced. She's a bit overcosted, I suppose. No, sorry, not overcosted. Just contradicted myself. What a load of nonsense. No, she's not overcosted. She's a reasonable price. She has magic resistance 2, which is very nice, which means that if she's in your Knight block, it means that because you've got a Blessing of the Lady as well, you're going to be getting a very respectable ward save against magic missiles, magic spells that allow you to take ward saves, and of course some of the nasty cheesy ones don't. She's only got toughness 3, which is a bit sexist really, just because she's a girl, she only gets toughness 3, unlike wizards of other races that get toughness 4. So she's a bit squishy. But she does have one advantage of her femininity, which is that the knights in this knightly chivalrous society allow her to ride in the second rank. She is freed of the obligation to go on the first rank like characters usually are. So she can be in the middle of the second rank of your knights, which means that enemies will not be able to attack her because they will not be able to get base-to-base contact on her, which is great when you are a squishy wizard with rubbish statistics. Now, of course, there is a big disadvantage to that, which is if you get that 7 on the miscast table, blow up, the knights around you, 8 knights, are going to be taking strength 10 hits, and no sorry, you do not get your magic resistance on your ward save there. You're just going to go straight to a 5+ Blessing of the Lady. That can wreck your knight units. Now, what I've started doing with my Prophetess is I've actually started running her on foot, quite interestingly. Partly, this is so she doesn't blow up units of knights. But it also, because I like to run her on heavens, I'll talk a little bit about magic in a minute, this gives her, I think, a wider range of potential targets for her spells. Now, the reason why a heavens Prophetess, I think, is very, very good is because you are able, with her, and especially on foot, to use Harmonic Convergence, which is a fantastic spell for Bretonnians because it lets you reroll 1s for your armor save. It stops you missing as often when you charge. It allows you to use those buffs. Also the debuffs, Curse on the Midnight Wind, Ice Shard, Blizzard. And also if she's on foot, and she's able to keep up with your knights so she can use those buffs, and some of them have got quite good ranges. She's also able, because she's on foot, to use her magic missiles and her direct damage spells as well. And if she's in a unit of knights, she is either going to be, probably for the first turns of the game, casting a couple of magic missiles out of the unit, but not using buffs because you don't need them yet. And when your knights, mixing it with the enemy, she's just going to be casting buffs and not your magic missiles because she's not going to be able to see anything. On foot, your Prophetess usually will be able to cast 3 or maybe even all 4 of her heaven spells every single magic phase, potentially. And really putting pressure on your opponents with magic is about making him make as many decisions as he can that are difficult. And the more potential spells you can cast in any given context, the more threat you're going to be able to exert, rather than feeling you have to just force things through by throwing 6 dice at them. So that's why I think a Prophetess on foot running heavens is a really, really good build on a Prophetess. Now, she is vulnerable, of course, to enemy flyers, enemy fast stuff coming around and attacking her. That's a problem. I like to run her with a unit of Peasant Bowman skirmishers, which gives her a little bit of protection from war machines, and generally makes her a little bit more survivable for shooting and things. But you have to be quite crafty about how you use the Prophetess on foot to stop her being removed as a conventional casualty. So most people probably prefer to run the Prophetess on a horse with your knights, but I think there's something to be said for running her on foot as well. Generally, the magic lore, as I say, heavens I think is the best. Life is also very strong. It's generically one of the strongest lores in Warhammer. I find it a bit monodimensional myself, and I like having some magic missiles because I like to be able to destroy chaff with magic, and Bretonnians are vulnerable to chaff. And life, while it makes your knights a lot more survivable, my philosophy is that you've really got to break your opponents on the charge, and if you're not doing that, you've probably bitten off more than you can chew, or you've just been a bit unlucky. And then I would rather, not, I suppose, design a wizard for those kind of situations. Beasts I like as well, but I think it's better on a lower level wizard. In terms of the magic items that your Prophetess has, she doesn't tend to need to pick protective magic items much if she's on the second rank of some knights, and she's got a 5-up ward anyway, remember, and magic res. You could give her Dispel Scroll, you could give her the Silver Mirror, which we'll come on to later, and there are a number of other really nice little arcane items that Bretonians can have as well that are very cheap. And so any Prophetesses or Damsels in your army will all be able to pick from a range of really quite nice cheap magic items, and so those are nice things for her to have. Next, you've got your two hero choices. The first one, which is probably the less complicated one, which I'll do first, is the Damsel. She's your level 1 or your level 2 wizard. And, you know, she's another magic item slot that you can give her, another arcane item pick. She gives you magic res 1 as well. Now, I like to run a Damsel on beasts because you're not allowed to run it on heavens. You're only allowed life and beasts. Life isn't very good in a low-level wizard because one of the spells is Throne of Vines, which just makes your other spells better. Obviously, that's only really good if you've got more spells. The other thing they've got is Earthblood on life. And Earthblood, really, if you've got a 5-up Blessing of the Lady anyway, a 5-up regen isn't really that useful. So she's going to be on beasts. Now, Beasts has got one of the best signature spells in Wissen's Wild Form, which is good on your army because it's one easier to cast because most of your stuff is horses. +1 strength and toughness, gives your knights the ability to grind a bit, gives your men-at-arms the ability to grind a bit as well. And also a number of other quite kind of useful spells as well that she can have in there, like Curse of Anria, Amber Spear, Savage Beast of Horos. I think it's usually worth making her a level 2, but you could have her as level 1 as well and just accept that your spell is going to be Wissen's Wild Form. So that's really the Damsel, not so much to say about her. And then there's the Paladin, on whom there is quite a lot to say. Now, the Paladin is your hero choice. He's not badly priced. And also, you get to have a free BSB with Britonia. You don't have to pay that 25 points that other races do. Now, all the rest of your stuff's overcosted anyway, so don't get too excited about that, but it's nice. But you have to have him in your army, which is fine, because realistically, you're not going to be playing with a BSB almost never, especially because your army doesn't have good leadership anyway. So, there are a number of ways of running this Paladin. One of the ways is a bit like the captain on a Pegasus for Empire. You can have a knight on a Pegasus. He's not quite as good in the sense that it's slightly harder to get him up to a 1+ armor save, but you can do it. And he's there, he's modestly priced, he gets another wound on his profile because of riding a Pegasus, and he's there to guard your war machines, protect your Prophetess on foot, maybe help in a supporting capacity with your knight's charge. One of the builds I like on him is to give him the Worm Lance, which is a magic item from Bretonia. It lets you do a little strength 3 breath weapon, which is quite nice because, you know, you've got Bretonians are not expected to have a breath weapon. You've got a flying guy. You could pop him up to the side of a big horde and then torch everyone with strength 3. Good against witch elves, good against high elves. You might kill 10 elves with that. Worth having. And also the Worm Lance gives him flaming attacks in combat as well. Now, because he's got initiative 5, that's more than most of your knights, apart from Grail Knights, where it's the same. And if you do 1 wound with that on a regenerating unit, that means that the regen is gone for all of your other knights to swing. You could also give him the Potion of Speed if you wanted to do that. If you wanted to make sure that your lords and your Grail Knights also benefited from the stripping of regen, you need to have him going first to do that. But initiative 5 is still enough to benefit most of the rest of your knights. So he's useful. He does a similar job to what Pegasus Knights do as the troop type. The next version of him, I think, and there are several versions of this, is basically a guy who's designed to not die. Now, there are several ways of getting 1-up rerollable armor saves with Bretonia. First of them is the Grommel Great Helm. Have that. You could have another guy with the Enchanted Shield and a Dawnstone. They both got 1-up rerollable armor saves. You could even do it to a third one with the Dragon Helm and maybe a Luckstone for a slightly cheaper but less reliable 1-up with 1 reroll armor save Paladin. Those guys can go in the front of your lance. Obviously they're going to give it a hit on the extra punch on the charge, but your opponent will be doing very little damage back because it's very hard to get through a toughness 4 1-up rerollable armor save model. Even if you only got 2 Paladins, just put them on the side and a champion in the middle. And even if your opponent kills your champion, that's the only model he's going to kill, because if you're not in base-to-base contact with the unit, you can't kill rank and file. And so you can see how, even if you don't do too many wounds yourself, your opponent won't do many back, and thus more of your ranks will be intact, more likely to break what he has. Now, this is the so-called character wall. Now, It is quite expensive and it is a bit all your eggs in one basket, but nonetheless, it's quite powerful. And it also is very good at taking charges as well as making them. And Bretonnians don't have too many things that can take charges. Even if the Paladins just take a charge, you might be able to charge something else into your opponent once you've held, and then break him with your charging unit instead. So those are nice. The next one, I think, is the best one of all, which is the guy with the virtue of the Impetuous Knight. Now, the virtue of the Impetuous Knight means that you roll an extra d6 when you charge. So, generally, it's 3d6 picking the highest 2. Now it's 4d6 picking the highest 3. Also, it works well if your unit's got the Banner of Swiftness. So, think about what this means. It means that your unit average charge range with the Banner of Swiftness is between 21 and 22 inches. That's ridiculous. And if you get a bit more than average, it can go physically further than anything else can, even with movement 10. So your knights can suddenly do impossible charges. Whoa. Now, there's nothing else that I'm aware of like this in the game. That, it's very baked into the pie. You've got your opponents thinking, he's got his cavalry there with his movement 8, maybe his movement 9 with the Banner of Swiftness, maybe. If I stay 20 inches away from him, I give him on a double 6 or maybe 21 inches away, and he won't be able to charge at all, then you will be able to charge after all. And that's going to really terrify him. And it might mean that he's having to choose a flee reaction with his main infantry block, and that's going to be really, really awful, especially if you've got some yeomen about that can then charge his fleeing infantry block and push him off the board. So, this is going to be another one of the things like the heroic killing blow guy that's going to make your opponent suddenly just look shocked and say, "What? I never saw that coming." Yes. Fairly obviously, this is the third of the 5 really powerful things in Bretonia, virtue of the Impetuous Knight. Best on a Paladin. You can put it on a Lord, but it's best on a Paladin because you want the Lord to be able to take kind of other stuff. Obviously, it's great if you put it in the same unit as the guy with Virtue of Knightly Temper because it makes the delivery mechanism for that nuclear weapon that much more powerful. It only works once, I should say, and it is 35 points, so it's not cheap, but it changes the way in which your army plays. It means your opponent sometimes, if he knows it's there, of course, it's best if he doesn't know at all, but if he does, he's going to be pushing backwards. And that means that you can throw rocks at him with your trebuchets and put the Comet of Casandora on his head. And thus, again, try and give him difficult decisions when it comes to where to move on the board. This is going to push him back. And eventually, he'll run out of board space, and then if your knights do charge him and he breaks, he'll go off the table, and you won't even need to pursue him. And it means your knights can follow him off the table as well and not get countercharged, which is great. Bretonnians like being near the table edge, the opposition's table edge anyway, and virtue of the Impetuous Knight allows you to do that. It is, in my view, a must-take, this magic item. Some people think that you should put it on Knights Errant and have it because if they fail their Impetuous test, then you might as well complete a charge that you don't want to make. I don't sure I agree with that, because if you put it on Knights Errant, by one reading of the rules, I think the reasonable reading, you are obliged before making your Impetuous test to assume you have got the virtue of the Impetuous Knight, which means that your Knights Errant's range of impetuousness is going to be 26 inches rather than 20, which is going to make them even more unreliable. I'd put it on a knight, put it on your BSB and put him in the Knight of the Realm unit, and then play havoc with your enemy with this very powerful and tricksy thing. Those are the 3 main Paladin builds. There are others that are good, but I think those are the 3. Right, now a little bit on to the magic items. I'm not going to go through all of these because there are loads of them, and this video is already getting long enough as it is. So, here are the blessed heirlooms of Britonia. Also, they have very long descriptions on them as well, which absolutely you should read. You should always read all the fluff with Britonia. You should always suddenly stop in the middle of the battle and tell your opponent exactly where the armour of Agilulf came from. It is believed that the knight wore his armour, but folklore claimed the axe blah 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 blah. You need to just read them stories and things, because you are a nice, spirit of the game, cuddly Bretonian player who has read all of the fluff, and for the rules, of which there aren't very many, he doesn't really care very much about, rather than someone who's trying to trick their opponent and trying to win anyway, despite having a bad army. Right, here are the blessed heirlooms. Now, some of the generic common magic items, Bretonians just have to pay more for, just because it's funny. An enchanted shield is twice as expensive in Bretonia as well anywhere else. Hilarious. They've got such heavy tariff walls coming into Bretonia that costs so much more. Pity. Right, the magic weapons. Which are the good ones? Well, the Sword of Heroes. That's not bad. Toughness 5 or more, you get +1 strength and D3 wounds. Combine that with the Virtue of Audacity, which gives you extra strength if the guy you're fighting is more than the knight that's doing the fighting. That's a great combination to kill monsters with. If I was playing in a big game and I had the availability of having a third Duke, I probably would put the Virtue of Audacity and the Sword of Heroes on him. But I like it less than the other two, even though I think it's great. Heartwood Lance, as I mentioned, reroll wounds, very nice. Birth Sword of Carcassonne. That's actually quite nice. There's another Duke build that I didn't mention that I used to run when I first played Bretonia that was nice. So you give him the Birth Sword of Carcassonne, which is enemy rerolls failed armor saves and you get +1 strength. Nice for a bit of grinding. You give him Virtue of Confidence to reroll hit and wound in duels, and the Gauntlet of the Duel, which means that duels cannot be refused when he challenges. He's going to be able to beat up most things in challenges with that, but some things will still beat him up because he is only a Bretonian lord. Next one you've got is the Morning Star of Fracasse. This is a big Morning Star. +2 strength, even if you're charged, and if you hit, for each hit, if you roll a 4+, your opponent's magic weapon is destroyed. Seems like a rather old-fashioned rule, that, but one I really rather like. Good on a Paladin. Good on one of the Paladins in a character wall. Even if your opponent doesn't do much damage, and then he finds himself without a magic weapon as well. Very nice. Worm Lance I mentioned, I like that. Magic armour then. You've got the Gromwell Great Helm, 1-up rerollable armour save. That's a great magic item. The armour of Agiluf, which I like. Weapon skill 10 on armour. Interesting. Again, that's good for one of your Paladins if you're trying to play that character wall, because it's going to make him 5s to hit against most stuff. Cuirass of Fortune. Reroll 1s of hit, wound and armour save. Magnifique. You absolutely want that. Orc-Bane Shield. Now, this is a bit garbage, but if you read the rules literally, actually not bad. So it makes Orc and Goblin players fail their animosity on a 1 or 2. Now obviously if you know you're playing Orcs, this is kind of really good, but it's also a little bit cheesy to pick that just because you know you're playing Orcs. But it also gives you +1 armour save. And it doesn't say it's a shield. Now you may say obviously it's a shield, because, it says it's a shield, but it doesn't say it counts as a shield in the rules. So if you want to be a bit giddy in rules lore, you could argue that's a way of giving you a 1-up armour save. But that's a little questionable. Too much fromage. Other ones in here that I think are quite nice. Dragon's Claw on the talismans. 5-up ward save all the time. Nice. And immunity from fire. Not bad. Enchanted items. The Falconhorn of Fredimund. Means that if you blow it, your opponent can't use his flying movement for a turn. He can only use his ground movement. So he's got Terrageasts, he's got Phoenixes, he's got Eagles, all of whom like to move about. That's just going to ground him completely. And against some armies that have got those powerful flyers, this is great. You can give it to a Prophetess as well or something like that. You don't need, maybe to have a bunch of magic items. It's 45 points, which is a lot. But at the same time, I think it's quite good. It depends entirely on the matchups, though. In a 5-round tournament, it might only be good in 2 of your games. Other ones I like here, the Antlers of the Great Hunt. Doesn't sound like a great item, you just roll an additional dice when you pursue. And you choose the highest. Now, I just think that that's nice to have maybe on a Paladin with like a really strong unit, because sometimes you want to not only catch your opponent when he flees, but sometimes you might want to get a really big pursue roll. Not good enough to just catch him. You might want to get out of the arc of another unit sitting by the side, and so just being able to give yourself a bit more speed on that pursuit roll is nice. Again, it's 25 points, but I think that's quite good if you're running that Paladin Star build. The Tress of Isolde, 2+ to hit for 1 round. Good with Virtue of Heroism. Gauntlet of the Duel, can't refuse challenges. Not bad with certain builds. But do bear in mind, a lot of other stuff will beat your things up in challenges anyway. Arcane items now. The Silver Mirror. Very nice. Now, this gives you basically a second Dispel Magic scroll that you can have with Bretonia. So you have a Dispel Magic Scroll and the Silver Mirror. You can now stop 2 spells. You've got some good anti-magic there. That's hard for your opponent to get through. Also, the Silver Mirror gives you a Strength 6 hit upon the wizard who cast the spell. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but if you are facing wounded wizards, they're going to be scared of casting against Britonia because you might be able to just pomp them off with the Silver Mirror. Remember that in 8th edition, a lot of the miscast rules wound wizards, and so sometimes you do have wounded wizards. It's not so bad if they don't get into a situation where they're in combat, because generally speaking, if a wizard's got 1 wound or they've got all 3, they usually die anyway in combat. But if they're sitting there out of harm's way and they've got 1 wound left, this gives you a way of finishing them off. Now you could, if you wanted to be sneaky, also try and get the feedback scroll in your army as well from the core rulebook. That means that for every dice your opponent uses to cast a spell, you roll a dice. And roll a 5 up, they take a wound. Usually that doesn't kill a level 4 wizard 6 dicing a spell, but with the Silver Mirror, you might be able to finish them off. Good chance there, especially with miscasts, that you might be able to finish off your opponent's wizard without going near the unit where they are in. Sacrament of the Lady. Doesn't even work in 8th edition. You should obviously pick that. Very funny. The player icon of Quenelles. Yes, that's very good. Now, this gives a unit the blessing, if they've not already got it. Now, you could use it to give a knight unit that's lost the blessing back its blessing. You could give it its blessing if you haven't prayed. But the real power here is to do it to a men-at-arms unit. It makes men-at-arms viable, which they're otherwise not really. So, you should run that on a Damsel. Have her pop the icon, which you can do at any time, and your men-at-arms get the blessing. Note that your damsel is under no obligation to stay with the men-at-arms. She can move elsewhere. And that means that you could even have her there on a horse with the men-at-arms, and she can trot away to another unit of knights where she would much prefer to be, and away from the smelly peasants, and have still given them their blessing. So, that's a useful item, essential if you're running men-at-arms. The Chalice of Malfleur. Yes, that's a nice one. My favourite, actually, of the arcane items. Very modest, gives you an extra dispel dice on a roll of 2 up in your magic phase, otherwise you get to take a wound. Just nice. Gives you, usually 4 dice or something in the course of a game. Absolutely worth having. Potion Sack allows you to add 1 to the result of 1 dice, which can cause an irresistible force. This is better in 6th edition, I guess, but for 10 points per model for it, it's nice. The magic banners, some a little bit tragic, I'm afraid. Banner of the Lady takes away your opponent's rank bonus, but doesn't break their steadfast. 100 points, a joke. Banner of Defense, 4 up ward save against missiles of strength 5 or more. Not bad on your Grail Knights. And then 2 other banners that I think are quite good. One is the Banner of Chalon, which makes your opponents not be able to stand and shoot for 10 points. Not bad. If you're charging something like Iron Drakes or something, that's good. The Herenti Banner is my favourite one. The Banner of the Young Men. Yes, it can only go on Knights Errant, and it means they get +1 strength on the charge. That's awesome, especially if you've got Devastating Charge. It bumps up your Knights Errant to strength 6 on the charge. But it means that their Impetuous test, which we'll come on to talk to about in a moment, means that it's going to be up -2, Leadership 5. So those young men are going to get you into all sorts of trouble. It's going to win you games, this banner, sometimes, and it's going to lose you games too. But nonetheless, it is almost irresistible. Right, those are the magic items. Now, let me talk about the actual troops, which won't take long, because there aren't very many. So, your core units. Knights of the Realm. Well, your standard knights. They're all right. 24 points a model, which is more than an Empire Knight that has a worse armor save than you, but, you can use the lance formation. It's not all bad news. He's got weapon skill 4. It's all right. And he's got leadership 8. And that's about it, really. It's only strength 5 on the charge, though. Now, all of the knight units get free champions, I should say, which is nice. A bit of incentive there for taking smaller units from time to time, actually, because the comparative advantage of a free champion obviously is that much better the more free champions you get. But generally speaking, your core Knight of the Realm unit is probably going to be about 10 men strong. If it's got your BSB, your General, and your level 4 Wizard in there, you're going to want to have 4 ranks on that lance for sure. So about 10, 9 would be about my minimum, I would say. And you want full command on there. Banner of Swiftness I like on this unit. The other core cavalry choice is Knights Errant, which are 4 points less per model than Knights of the Realm. I like them a little more than Knights of the Realm because I think that 4 points you save for the extra disadvantages that Knights Errant get probably worth the saving. So Knights Errant are only weapon skill 3. Now, of course, if you are charging something with weapon skill 3, that is a problem because your Knights Errant are only hitting on 4s, whereas your Realms will be hitting on 3s. But many things have got weapon skill 4 or more, and it means that your Realms are hitting on 4, your Errants are hitting on 4 as well. They've also only got Leadership 7. That's less of a problem if they're near your general, but is a problem if they're out on one side. And then they've also got the Impetuous special rule, which means that if you are within a viable charge range, which of course in 6th ed just means 16 inches, in 8th ed it means 20 inches, or 26 inches with the virtue of the Impetuous Knight, it means you've got to take a leadership test. And if you fail it, you charge. -2 if you've got the Herenti Banner. Now, the reckless young men of Bretonia can get you into some very, very interesting situations. Sometimes they can declare a charge and you're forced to think, well, am I going to charge my other units in there now that my Knights Errant have got to charge, or am I just going to let the young men do their stuff? Sometimes I've been in situations where the Knights Errant have made me charge my other units in. And sometimes it's been for the best, and I've broken my enemy when otherwise I naturally would have been too cautious to do so, which is very appropriate, I think, the brave young men making the Bretonian lord, gird his stout loins into his horse and charge like he did when he was a young man. Excellent. So, I like Knights Errant. They also have slightly cheaper command than Knights of the Realm as well. And so, they are absolutely a worthy unit. You could even have units of 5 of them, I should say, maybe as a chaff clearance unit, because or to use as chaff potentially as well. It's only 100 points, and you've got champion in there as well. Otherwise, I like to have 12 of them with the Herenti Banner. That's enough for a full lance, hits like a ton of bricks and it charges. If it dies, it's not the end of the world. You'll also find with your knight units, a lot of the time, even if your opponent breaks them in combat, you'll get away because you're fast, and so sometimes they're harder to finish off than you think. Men at Arms. 5 points per model for a smelly peasant with a halberd or a spear and a shield and light armour. It's a bit expensive for what it is, but it's still 5 points. You can have, potentially a horde of halberdiers. They've got strength 4, loads of attacks. That's weapon skill 2, and leadership 5, which kind of sucks. But, they're not as good as halberdiers, but nonetheless, they are still cheapish infantry. Now, you can... I like to deploy these as a bus, which is just something that maximizes ranks. And it's there to protect your knights. It's there to allow your knights to charge things that have charged your men-at-arms, and the men-at-arms have stuck because they're steadfast. They are there to receive charges. That is what they are. Their job is. Prayer Icon of Quenelles makes them a lot more survivable, and having an Amber Wizard about so she can cast a Whiston's Wild Form on them can also make them a bit better. I think they've got a place, but they're not that great, and it's important to keep a knight nearby to make sure their leadership is at least 8, because otherwise it's 5. Next one, Peasant Bowman for 6 points a model. It's a man with a longbow. Rollish in combat, but he does have ballistic skill 3 and a 30-inch longbow, so it's not an absolute car crash. These are best for chaff clearance, shooting your opponent's light cavalry off. Hopefully, they'll be in short range because they've got quite a long range, which might help a bit, but, don't expect too much from them. On a big unit, if you wanted to have that, you could give them braziers, 5 points for the whole unit. Doesn't matter how many it is, it's still only 5 points for flaming bow shots. If you get a wound with that, that's regen gone for your other archers and for your trebuchets if they come afterwards. Not bad. You also have defensive stakes, which gives you a wall in front of your bowmen, makes them a little bit more resilient if they're charged, and that wall could potentially stop a cannonball. You could put it in front of a trebuchet, for example. You can also have 1 unit of skirmishing bowmen for a point more a model. I like that. Just a little unit to run about. Get in the way. Good place for my Prophetess to go as well if I'm running her on foot. Gives her a bit of manoeuvrability as well, allow her to run about with them. So, they've got a place, Peasant Bowman. I wouldn't have too many of them, but enough to do some shooting to try and destroy your opponent's chaff. Special units now. The first one are the Questing Knights. The knights who have gone on a beautiful quest to try to find the Grail. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I'm afraid the only quest that the Questing Knights are going to be going on is a quest to someone's model display cabinet, where they sadly will stay in pursuit of the Grail until probably Warhammer the Old World comes out and maybe makes them a bit better. Reason why they're rubbish is because they've got a double-handed weapon. And in 6th Ed, if you charged with that, you used to strike first. A lot better. Now you always strike last. You can't use their shield, which means they've only got a 3-up save in combat. And they're going to die very quickly like that. I'm afraid I see very little use for Questing Knights at all. They really are not that great. Pegasus Knights now. I like them. Pegasus Knights are expensive. They're 55 points a model. That's overpriced, but I still like them anyway. Because they've got 3-up armor save, toughness 4 because of the Pegasus. The Pegasus itself has got a couple of attacks, strength 4 and a stomp as well because it's monstrous cav. These guys are great to have flapping about on one flank. They can guard war machines, protect your Prophetess on foot. They hit harder than you think, especially with devastating charge. They've got a free champion, of course, on them as well. Sometimes you can charge them into the flank of an enemy and not run. And so sometimes they can pin your opponent down in unexpected and funny ways. If they flee, they usually get away. Don't worry about fleeing with them that much as well. In a sense, that's what they're for. They're not bad. I like a unit of those. Next, the Grail Wellerquay with Battle Pilgrims. Oh dear. Well, they're Grail Knight fanboys. They're pretty cool. But what they do is they've got Weapons Skill 2, Leadership 8 and Stubborn. And they kind of have a model Grail Knight that they push about, which got a few wounds and attacks. It's really not very good because its stats are a bit rubbish. They don't get parry because they've got the blessing anyway, so they don't benefit from that. They've got hatred as well, but they've only got strength 3. Best way of running them, if you want to do it, I think, is in a dart. Have the Grail Reliquary at the front with men behind it, and use it to try and minimise the frontage that your opponent is getting so he can't kill as many of your models and benefit from the stubborn rule and charge stuff with your knights. It's really not great, but that's really the only use I can see for them. They're largely useless. Next one, Mounted Yeomen. Basically, these are the most vanilla cavalry that you could ever expect to see in Warhammer. They are just men with average statistics, leadership 6, with a spear and a bow on a horse. That's it. And they cost 15 points per model and they're special. Have a look and compare that to Dark Riders. Dark Elf Dark Riders. The Dark Rider has higher movement, higher weapon skill, higher ballistic skill, higher initiative, higher leadership, has always strikes first, has a repeater crossbow, has a spear, and is core. And it costs almost the same as your Peasant Bowman. At that point you're thinking, surely there's something wrong here. Surely there's something broken. Surely my army is disadvantaged. And yes, of course it is, because Warhammer Fantasy isn't fair. Did you expect it to be? If so, if you didn't like the fact that it wasn't fair, go and play with Dark Elves or Warriors of Chaos or High Elves or something like that. Quit moaning. This is Bretonia we're talking about here. Yes, so don't complain about your mounted yeomen that much. But despite all that, they're still fast cavalry, and they can still run about, get in the opponent's way, do all the cool things that fast cavalry can do, even though they're the worst fast cavalry in the game. And for that reason, I still like to have a unit of them, because they can be useful. Master things like conga lines if you're going to use fast cavalry. Remember, you can reform as many times as you like and go in any formation. Conga lines are good at blocking multiple enemy units. You need to learn these kind of things if you're going to play Bretonia. Can't walk your Death Star forwards 6 dice spells and expect to win! That's what you should complain and criticise your opponent for doing, with self-righteous, sanctimonious, holier-than-thou-ness, which absolutely is what you should do if you play Bretonia, even though, of course, it's all a trick. Rare units now. 2 of them. They're both good. One of them is the Grail Knight. The knight who has quested for the Grail, has found it and drunk from it, given it by the Lady of the Lake to become immortally in her servitude. Well, Grail Knights, a bit worse than Chaos Knights, but yeah, they're all right. They've got weapon skill 5, 2 attacks and strength 4. Not bad, but particularly good when you put this on a lance formation and with devastating charge. With Devastating Charge, 9 Grail Knights throws a lot of excellent attacks. They are excellent on the charge. Now, they do die as easily as other knights, though. So, that is the problem with them. And they are 38 points per model. That is 8 points overcosted, I would say. But nonetheless, they're still quite good, I think. They are all champions, or they count as champions, and so you potentially can keep challenging again and again and again a powerful enemy character. It's another way you can use them. But generally speaking, I like to run them on one flank, where they immunity to psychology helps them. Don't have to take any of these sorts of tests, and try and let my opponent have it with them. They are a powerful unit. The next one you've got is the fourth of the powerful things of Britonia, which is the Field Trebuchet. Wow, this is very, very powerful. This is a war machine that is a big catapult. Really nasty. Strength 10 under the whole d6 wounds and strength 5 otherwise. Use it to pound enemy formations with, or take off some nasty monstery things. It's best with Bretonia fired at infantry, because you might be able to kill 25 guys under the hull. Well, not 25, be able to hit 25 with 20mm bases. That's going to take a big chunk out of your opposing infantry block. One proper treb hit on them, and you can probably charge them with your knights, and certainly if you get 2. I like to have 2 trebuchets in a 2,500 point game. They're only 90 points each as well. They are very undercosted. They are an excellent war machine. They've also got 4 wounds as well, which means they're a little bit less vulnerable to being cannoned off than other war machines are. Superb, the trebuchet. If you've got 2 of them in your list, also it means that your opponent probably is going to have to come towards you because he doesn't want to get hit by your trebuchets. And that can matter a lot for Bretonia. If you also have the Comet of Casandora in your army and put that on top of its head, that and 2 trebuchets, that's going to be enough for your enemy to get ants in his pants and probably go towards you. And then you let him have it with the virtue of the Impetuous Knight. That's how you've got to do it. So, excellent, the Field Trebuchet. A must-take in a competitive Bretonian list. 2 of them. Now, I didn't mention these special characters when I talked about Lords, and I'm going to, because special characters are important here. And, in those days, in 6th edition, you didn't necessarily have to get your opponent's consent before using special characters, so you should assume you are allowed to use them unless you have been explicitly told you shouldn't. And really, if you not allowed to use special characters with Bretonia, that's about, even though you've only got 3, that's about, a quarter of your army gone, because you've not really got any troops. So the first one is the Green Knight! Oh, yes, I know it's a black and white illustration, but, this was the year 2000. Printing was expensive in those days. This is the spiritual form rumoured to be Gilles de Breton himself, who helps the Lady of the Lake doing her bidding. Sometimes he appears when questing knights are at the end of their quest and gives them a little fight. Probably not too hard a fight, because they've only got, 3+ armour save. And if they beat him, they can become a Grail Knight. And generally, he does lots of cool stuff defending the waterways and the Grail chapels and the beautiful parts of old Bretonia from those who would defile them. Anyway, in game terms, let me tell you all about the Green Knight, because he is a very unusual piece. He, I think, is one of the best special characters in Warhammer. If he's not the best, he is the most unconventional. Now, okay, so he's a man on a horse, like a lord, weapon skill 7. But that doesn't really tell you very much. He doesn't appear on the battlefield at the beginning of the game. He appears in a natural piece of terrain, woods, rivers, marshes, rivers, etc., not buildings. He can appear in those on a roll of 3 up, just like an ambusher. And then he can move, including marching normally. This means that if you've got at least 3 pieces of natural terrain on your table, which you really should do, your Green Knight is going to basically be able to go wherever he wants in turn 1. When he appears. Now sure, sometimes he might not appear, and that might be a pain in the balls. I played a game once where he didn't come on for the whole game. He was just dead at the end of it. So it was just like playing without 300 points, without 275 points, which is what he costs. So, what can he do? Well, the main reason the Green Knight's good is because he's ethereal, which means that he can't be harmed by anything that doesn't have magic attacks. Which means that most of the things in the whole of this game can't damage the Green Knight. Only magic spells and magic attacks. And the only things that have got magic attacks generally are things with magic weapons. Unless you're playing demons, for example, in which case the Green Knight's not great. But, you know, even if you do face magical attacks, he's got a 2-up armor save and a 5-up ward save anyway, and 3 wounds and toughness 4. So it's not as though he's unprotected anyway. So, what he becomes brilliant for is going into things that don't have a lot of fixed combat resolution. Fixed combat resolution, every point he loses combat by takes a wound off him, so he can collapse quite quickly, you know, just like any kind of undead, if he goes into something with high combat resolution. So try and take on things that have got low combat resolution but are really good. Steam tanks, Mournfang cavalry, demigryphs, monsters. Anything like that is excellent for the Green Knight because he can kill them because he's got magic sword, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is quite good, and they're not going to be able to do any damage to him whatsoever, which is perfect. You can use him in that way, just like you can with a wraith or something like that with the undead, but you can also dish out damage as well, which is a really nice thing too, as well as not allowing your opponent to kill him. And he's just fantastic in that regard. Also, do you know, if you kill him, he can come back to life. You got that right, he can. Unbelievable. If he dies, you roll a 4+, the next Bretonian turn you have, and he comes back on the board in another natural terrain piece, which could just be somewhere else, and so he can do the whole thing all over again. You can also teleport about from natural terrain pieces. He's very, very hard to kill, and even if he does die, bloody well comes back to life. Very difficult for your opponent to get the points out of the Green Knight because of these rules, and he is literally the father of all of the chaff. He can get in the way till the cows come home. He is brilliant at blocking things. His Dolorous Blade means that he either gets plus d6 extra attacks, which is usually what you're going to use if you're fighting stuff where you want to knock their combat res down, or plus 2 strength, which gives him strength 6, very respectable. Means that he can, you know, damage monsters and, you know, and other powerful things. He's good against most stuff, to be honest, the Green Knight. For me, he is one of the best things in Warhammer Fantasy. He does all manner of unpredictable things. Your opponent won't know he's coming. He can disappear into different places, die and come back to life. He is going to give your opponent no end of headaches. Be an absolute pain in the proverbials, the Green Knight. Causes terror as well. Now, he does come out of Lords, and that's your problem. If you're only playing with 25% Lords, he's hard to take because your other character choice is going to be a Prophetess. And that means you're only going to have a Leadership 8 General, and you're going to have to leave Mr. Heroic Killing Blow and Mr. Virtue of Knightly Temper stewing in the banquet hall. But if you've got 50% characters, you can have all 4. Right, the next one is the Fei Enchantress, the nominated representative of the Lady of the Lake on Earth. Yes, Morgana Le Fay and her fair unicorn Silveron, rather. Now, this is pretty good, I think. The Fei Enchantress is massively overcosted, but, as I say, I think she's got a place because I think that what she gives you is quite good, even though she's 100 or 150 points too expensive. She's a premium wizard. She can choose from any magic deck, which means she can use Death or Light, good on Bretonians. But if she chooses Life, she gets +6 to cast, so she's a very powerful Life spellcaster. In addition to all this, she has some great other special rules. She gives your army the Blessing of the Lady automatically, which means you can roll for first turn, which takes away one of the big disadvantages that Bretonians have. She also has a thing called the Spiteful Glance, which used to be in 5th edition, turning people into a toad. Doesn't say anything about that now, but nonetheless, if they fail an initiative test and base to base with her, they get wounded. That's not that great, but, you know, but it's cute. She has some great magic items. She has the Chalice of Potions, which allows you to cast a random heaven spell. You don't have to use any magic dice, that just casts. So that's really nice. You get a free spell with that until you roll a 6 and get Chain Lightning, and then it's expired. She also has a Power Familiar, which gives you a +1 power and dispel dice in every turn. That's really strong as well. And she has a 4-up ward save. Now, the 2 problems with her. One is that she's overcosted. She's going to basically take up your whole Lord allowance. It's not a disaster because she has got Leadership 9, so she can be your general, and so that's, you know, okay. But the other problem with her is to do with 8th edition, unfortunately. She comes on a monstrous cavalry base because she is riding an unicorn. And the unicorn means that she takes up twice as much space as a normal horse. And so she can't just simply slip elegantly into the second rank as a damsel or a prophetess would be able to do. No, she has to rather inelegantly have one of her sides sticking out because she's too wide to fit in the knight unit. And if a knight were to say to her, well, excuse me, milady, you can't go in the middle of the knight unit anymore because you're too wide, he would get turned into a toad, and rightly so for his impertinence and his ungallantness. But, nevertheless, while she has one of her sides sticking out and she can be attacked by stuff because of that, the main problem, I think, with the monstrous cavalry is that she's not getting a lookout madame because she's a different troop type to the other dudes in her unit, which means a cannon will fire at her every single time. She does have a 4-up ward save, but 545 points and your general and your wizard down the drain if that cannon makes its mark. You've got to have a lot of balls to use the Fei Enchantress, rather ironically. Now, the last special character almost is... I just regard these pages about King Luen Leoncoeur to be fluff, mainly, because while there are numbers and things on the pages, their numbers don't make any sense. King Luen Leoncoeur is probably the worst piece in Warhammer Fantasy, bar none, in terms of what you get for your points. It's ironic, isn't it? The King of Bretonia is one of the worst things in Warhammer Fantasy. Je suis désolé, my king. You are the worst. He's 728 points, which means that you've got to have a 3,000 point army to even be allowed to have Leoncoeur. And what does he do? Well, he's got like the same stats as a normal lord, a bit better in 1 or 2. He's only got leadership 9, and he rides a very overpriced hippogriff. He's got a ward save and regeneration together. Woo! And he can only use 1. See, in 6th ed, he used to be able to use both. He's got an okay magic sword. He's got okay armour. But he's monster and rider, which is rubbish. Some of his magic items cancel each other out. And he is massively overcosted. If he was half the number of points, and I mean that half, we would be having a sensible conversation about King Leoncoeur. But as it is, there is no sensible conversation to be had about him whatsoever. Now, in this last little bit of the video, I'm just going to tell you about some tactics. Number 1, use the lance formation. Almost always you're going to want to use that. The only occasions where you're not going to want to use a lance is if you've got maybe some knights guarding the flank and you want to expand their frontage. Maybe bring them up to units of, say, 5 or 5 wide frontage so you can see a bit more. Knight lances have got very narrow frontage. Your opponent can easily pop fast things over to the blind sides of your knights where they can't see. Expanding the frontage a little can be useful to stop that happening. But generally speaking, you're going to want your lance formation. Sometimes you need to use combat reforms as well. If your opponent holds, you might want to bring some more knights from the 3rd and 4th ranks up to give you more models fighting. Only if it benefits you, though. Next thing, really materially. What are the real threats that your opponent has got? Look very, very carefully, and then look again at your opponent's army. Where are the things in there that ignore armour? That's going to be bad for your knights. Where's the Law of Metal Wizard? Where's the nasty Skaven thing that just goes through your army? What's he got that's fast and that's faster than your knights? Because they're going to be vulnerable to being charged by... your knights are going to be vulnerable to being charged by that. Be careful about where those kind of threats are. Where are his flyers? Flyers are nasty for Britonia. Where's his chaff? What are your scoring opportunities? That's the other thing to look at. What do you think you can take off? It might be that his big infantry block in the middle would be very difficult to kill. So, what's he got? He's got some monsters in the list. You're good against monsters. You've got several different dukes with good virtues. You've got trebuchets. You've got the Green Knight. You can take off monsters. You're good against that. Work out where those are. Carefully assess that main infantry block and ask yourself this question. How breakable is it? How likely am I, if I charge 2 lancers in, or maybe 2 lancers plus my hero on a Pegasus to break that unit? Think about how many casualties you're likely to cause. Think about how many ranks your biggest knight unit is going to have left at the end. Is that going to be equal or more to the number of ranks he's going to have? Because if it's not, he's going to be steadfast, he's going to hold, and you're probably going to lose. If it's too big for you to chase, with your knights, try and drop some rocks on it first. Try and whittle it down so then you can kill it. Or if the worst comes to the worst and you do find a really horrible infantry block that you just can't deal with, don't fight it. Just give it chaff, kill the other things in his army. Except that thing he's got there is too good for your knights, I'm afraid. Wait for a newer edition where maybe you can break it, or play an older one, of course. Now, if he's got stubborn in his list, generically stubborn, Crown of Command and generically stubborn, be very careful, because you are going to not be able to break that unit unless you wipe it out. You have to be very confident you're going to wipe it out, because otherwise you're going to be in big trouble with a stubborn unit. Stubborn unit's the absolute bane of Bretonia. This is one of the problems with closed lists. If you think you might have Crown of Command, think about armies that often have Crown of Command. Ogres often have Crown of Command, for example, on their main gut star. So be careful with that. Use zoning, especially if you've got Virtue of the Impetuous Knight, which is to say, make it quite obvious to your opponent that, you're within charge range and he's not. If you push him back, that's good. If he goes back towards your table edge and you push him back there with your knights and then you charge him, he's got nowhere to go if he breaks and flees, and your knights can follow him off the table and not get countercharged. This is even better if you use your trebuchets and your comet to further cramp him up in his deployment zone. If your opponent's being cagey against you, that's usually a good thing for you. And you do have some charging threats that are very fast, and so often he will be cagey. But the thing that's going to stop him being cagey is his chaff, his light cavalry that's going to run in front of all your lances. Destroy the light cavalry. They're the most annoying thing for you. How can you destroy them? Well, you can shoot them off with your Peasant Bowman. You can use magic missiles. You've got a couple of good Heavens missiles. Anything you can get hold of that gets rid of them, better. Ruby Ring of Ruin, not bad on like a Prophetess on foot. That's another little thing that can spew out a cheap magic missile. Or you might want to destroy his chaff in combat with Pegasus Knights, with little units of knights, probably not your mounted yeomen because other chaff is going to beat those. So get rid of the chaff, and then your knights can trot along and destroy him. Protect your flanks is the next one. You've got great big long flanks that are easy for your opponent to charge, and you've got narrow charge arcs yourself. So be careful with that. Sometimes if you rank up all your lances close together, sometimes you might want to spring the middle one out, but find that you can't wheel it round your other lances because they block each other. So you be careful of that kind of thing, although I know it's hard. Sometimes your knights can take charges. Not that often, but sometimes. And if they can, then it might give your other knights a chance to charge in as well. So occasionally you might want to absorb a charge with one unit of knights, especially if you're not playing with Devastating Charge. You're going to have to play a little bit more like that. Next thing, consider fleeing if you have to. It's better to run away than to be dead, even though being dead is very honourable. Sometimes stuff charges you that you just can't stand up to as Bretonnians, and so it's better to run away. Yeah, you lose your blessing, but so what? It's not that big a deal in the end. And sometimes people don't run away because they're afraid of losing their blessing and they just watch their knights die instead. You can't be precious about your blessing, I'm afraid, if you want to win, rather than just merely be like a Bretonian and go lambs to the slaughter for the honour of the lady, which is a totally legitimate thing to do, by the way. Just not for me, because I'm not really a Bretonian. Anyway, use your speed. That's the next thing. You've got a quick army. Now, this not only means your charges should be advantageous, but it also means you can run away. Not just by fleeing, but say you go into heavy combat, you win, and most of your knights die and you've got a few left. The best thing to do if you're playing competitively is just try to preserve those points. Run away. Go for some elaborate dressage behind his ranks. Maybe fight a few war machines, but don't do anything else. Just try and get those knights away to a part of the battlefield where they'll survive the battle. Remember, in 8th ed, you have to kill all of the models in a unit to get the points for it. Often knight units, if they don't run away, can be quite surprisingly hard to finish off because it's very easy to get them into positions where your opponent can't kill them anymore by running them behind, terrain or whatever, and just using their speed to get away. That means they can be harder to get points off than you think, Bretonians. Next would be exploit his overconfidence and surprise him. Yes, with all these tricks, there are many elements of the unknown. And of course, You know, you're playing Bretonnians, as I say, and so you can talk a good talk. You should absolutely, as I say, talk all about the fluff, swear at your troops in French if you're able to pronounce it half decently. That's also, you know, a nice thing to do. Makes people think, oh, what a nice guy I'm facing. And of course you should always be a nice guy. I'm being a little bit playful when I'm saying these things, because Britonia sometimes, while they are not very good, sometimes they're better than you think. But certainly you can use the element of surprise. The last thing I'm just going to do is talk about magic, because no video is really complete without these. Here are the magic cards in all their glory. Talk to you about Heavens first, which is my favourite of the lore. It has to be on a Prophetess. So, what have we got here? Well, we've got Ice Shard Blizzard, the signature. Excellent little spell. A hex with a range of 24 inches. Or 48 if you boost it. -1 to hit, -1 leadership. That's really, really nice. It's really easy to cast. Stops war engines firing on a 4-up as well. Lovely little spell. You can cast it all the time. Every magic phase there'll be a good use of Ice Shard Blizzard. It is a Miss Universal of spells. The next one, Harmonic Convergence. Oh, thanking the stars. A beautiful, beautiful spell. 6 to cast. Pathetic. You might go to 1 dice it if you're cheeky. We roll rolls of 1 to hit, wound, and armor save. Obviously, on heavy cavalry, that's 2-up armor save. That's really good. Means that, you know, if you get a whole horrible set of dice with loads of 1s, you just re-roll the 1s. Also, if you charge, it stops a little bit the rubber lance syndrome, where you just like miss with all your lances because you can re-roll the 1s. Wounding, not so important, but still useful. You can bubble it up for 12 plus, hitting all units within 12. Your lances are usually quite close together. So often, if you can get a bubbled up harmonic convergence through, your knights will absolutely wreck your opponent to a much greater extent than he's expecting, because all of your bad dice will just be cancelled out by harmonic convergence. What a great spell. Works on shooting as well. If you've got a Heavens Wizard on foot, she bubbles up harmonic. You might hit a Trebuchet, Peasant Bowman with it. Trebuchet would be re-rolling 1s to wound. When it hits someone with a rock, that's pretty big. Lovely spell, Harmonic Convergence. You've got to roll to get it, and it's on a 1, but nonetheless, beautiful spell. Euronon's Thunderbolt. Nice magic missile. Long range, D6 strength 6 hits. And if you cast it on flyers, which will often be your target because you want to clear chaff, does D6 strength 4 hits also from the Law of Heaven's Rolling Skies lore attribute. Wind Blast! It's not very good, but it's underrated. It pushes your opponent back. In its own little way, it can help you sometimes control the board. It's good against orcs and goblins because you can push mangler squigs and fanatics about, but against most other armies I generally wouldn't bother with it. But it has its uses. Curse of the Midnight Wind, a lovely spell. Makes your opponent reroll his 6s. It's like Harmonic Convergence the other way round. I like it less than Harmonic Convergence because it's a bit more expensive to cast, but it's still very good for the same reasons. And now we'll do the number 6 before the number 5, because the number 5 should be the number 6 in Heavens. Number 6 is Chain Lightning. It's a direct damage spell, D6 strength 4, 6 hits. Jumps to the next unit on a roll of 3-up. It's not a very good number 6. It's 15 plus. It's quite overcosted, but it has its uses. It's good against wood elves because they've got a lot of flyers, because each thing you hit with a Chain Lightning also takes the Rolling Skies lore attribute if it's flying. But, you know, it's not a bad spell. It's worth having, definitely. And then the real number 6 is the Comet of Casandora! This is great. It should just be referred to as Comet. You just point at the table and just say Comet. In the 9th Age, where they renamed all the spells, this equivalent of this spell is called Wrath of God, which is also a pretty cool name. But still, players call it Comet, because some things just never die, or never get old, and the Comet is one of them. So, you put a coin on the table, on a roll of 4-up in your opponent's next magic phase, the Comet comes, and does 2d6, strength 4, plus the number of markers, which is always 1, so it's always at least 5, hits. And it does it within 2d6 plus the number of markers range. So if it doesn't come for a turn, that's 2d6 plus 2, strength 6 hits on everything within 2d6 plus 2, which is horrible. So, you can put the Comet on your opponent's head in his movement phase. If he's caging up from your knights, putting a comet on him that you can see coming out of the sky is going to make him think twice about what he's doing, and then he might go forwards, and then you can charge him. It's very powerful at making your opponent move about. It can control the game board, control the battlefield. Now, it's less good if your opponent has like one big infantry block, because they're not scared of that. But lots of little units, which all get hit by the comet, it's great. It's good against chariots that can't march. Good against war machines, if it doesn't come for the first turn, because then you're up to strength 6, and then you can start to damage them a bit more easily. Now, for the lovers of comet, the lovers of Casandora, of which I am definitely one, the Demon Prince is probably another, the problem with it is if it doesn't come, and your knights charge forward, it could kill them as well. So sometimes it'll end up flattening your knights as well, which isn't ideal. So that's why be a bit careful with it. It's quite fun to cast if you're losing as well, the Comet of Casandora, because you just put it on the head of like your general or something if he's about to die. It's not the best spell in Warhammer Fantasy, but it's amongst the most fun. And, you know, it's irresistible to take it, I think. Almost irresistible. Right, the other two laws now. Let's do life first. Now, I am less of a fan of life than most people. The reason being is because you have to have Throne of Vines to make life good, I think, and that means you've only got 3 different spells after you've got Throne of Vines. It can mean often you're just a little bit predictable. You've only got a few viable spells to use in every turn. It's got a great lore attribute, life, restoring wounds to stuff. Not so good for your Bretonnians because you don't have big multi-wound pieces. But, you know, Earthblood, not a great signature for you because you've got Blessing anyway. Awakening in the Wood is a basic magic missile, not that great. Throne of Vines we've mentioned. And then basically the other really good life spells. Shield of Thorns, Slash to Stone and Regrowth, obviously all great. Regrowth great on Grail Knights because they're an expensive sort of model. And finally you've got the Dwellers Below, which is the only real disgusting, dirty, overpowered nuke number 6 that your Bretonnians have got. The number 6s on Heavens and on Beasts are just not that great. But Dwellers Below is an old-fashioned, nasty, knock over the battlefield kind of number 6 spell from the deepest bowels of brokenness. Everything in the opposing unit takes a strength test or it's just dead. That's it. No imagination, just nothing. It's a great way of dealing with infantry blocks, especially if you've not got devastating charge. I think it's got a place life. I've used to use it. It can be good in the right situations, but I find it to be a little bit predictable. I don't think it helps Bretonnians as much as it helps other races. Beasts then. Now Beasts on a level 4 is alright, but I don't think it's that great. On a level 2, on a level 1 I like it because you've got Wissen's Wild Form, great signature spell, you can always take it. Flock of Doom I don't rate. It's not a very good magic missile. The Amber Spear, that's like a kind of a war engine style magic missile. That's not bad to supplement your trebuchets. Pan's Impenetrable Pelt, that's obviously great, buffs the toughness of your characters if you've got that Paladin sort of build with lots of Paladins. So is the Savage Beast of Horos, even more so. If you get that off with 3 of your Paladins bumping up 3 strength and 3 attacks, that's fantastic. Curse of Enriar, great spell. You can always cast it. -1 for your opponent to hit, and they fail dangerous terrain test on a 1 or 2, and even open ground counts as dangerous terrain. If they're on a hill and they move off the hill, 2 sets of dangerous terrain tests. It's a dirty spell, the Curse of Anria. And then the irresistible and the irreplaceable transformation of Godon, number 6, which will usually get your wizard killed if you use it, but sometimes it's got a place if you want to be really fun and turn into a mountain chimera or a great fire dragon or something like that. So, usually I prefer beasts on a level 2. Right, mesdames and messieurs, c'est la fini. It is the end of this performance. And I wonder, where's my Demon Prince gone? Where? Oh my word. It seems like he's invited all his mates for a horrible booze up on cheap Blue Nun downstairs. Goodbye. I guess I better head this off.